Thanks for tuning back in. I'm Robby Soave, joined by Jessica Burbank to continue to react to the presidential debate we just saw between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. I'm not seeing anyone really online calling this a win for Donald Trump. Even people on the right conceding this was not a great night and blaming squarely the moderators for ganging up on Trump, fact-checking him, not doing the same for Kamala Harris. Noticed in particular, she attributed his bloodbath comment to being a call for political violence when it refers to the economic situation he thinks would happen under the continuation of the Biden administration under Harris. That was something they didn't correct, but they corrected a lot of things Donald Trump said. So that's the kind of defensiveness the right is having about this debate, because Trump absolutely seemed to get rattled, seemed to get bogged down in talking about personal things, his business stuff, having to relitigate again the 2020 election, which is not something persuadable voters want to hear about, how he actually won it, how his actions on January 6th were not really that bad. So this did not end up being a night for Donald Trump to gain ground among the persuadable voters. The prediction markets have Harris closing that little bit of a gap that had opened up with Donald Trump being ahead in some of the prediction markets recently. Now it's again all tied up. What are your thoughts, Jessica?
Yeah, I don't think blaming the moderators is a smart strategy here. They only stepped in and corrected when it was an obvious lie. It is true that he said if he didn't win, it would be a bloodbath. She doesn't deserve, or Trump doesn't deserve additional context added to his regularly violent rhetoric. And it's true that he chooses violent rhetoric on purpose when talking about mundane things. It was a direct quote. There's nothing to correct there. I do think that Kamala Harris specifically handled in the latter half of this debate the questions about race really well. She said it's a tragedy we have someone who wants to be president throughout the course of his career has used race to divide people. And I'm paraphrasing there. It's almost an exact quote. And I think handling the race commentary in that way is really smart. She focused on the future, about how we're going to invest in the dreams and aspirations and ambitions of people, really honing in on what the rhetoric will be around the opportunity economy. And Trump's closing remarks were pretty much, these guys are bad. They're the worst, vice president and president we've ever had, really just focusing on the past. And I think that's really what hurt him, is he let Kamala Harris definitely get under his skin with a lot of the comments that she made tonight.
Yeah, I think focusing on the bad of the Biden-Harris administration is a good idea. Surveys after survey show vast dissatisfaction among the American people with the economy, with immigration, with how things have been handled over the last 4 years. But did Donald Trump take the opportunity to explain what he's going to do differently, why his plan to fix the economy is better, why Harris is going to, I found it interesting. At one point she said, he was criticizing Joe Biden, I think, again, showing you that he really wishes he was still running against Joe Biden. And then she said, well, I am not Joe Biden and I am not Donald Trump. But of course, she's been a part of the administration. She's been responsible for the policies of Joe Biden. So does she not stand by these policies? She's at various points not really meant to explain what the differences are. But yes, it was a missed opportunity, certainly, for Donald Trump. I think if people who don't know Kamala Harris were watching and trying to decide, could I envision this person as president? I don't think she said anything so alarming, not to any near the extent of Joe Biden, obviously setting up all these setting off alarm bells during the last debate, causing people almost in a very non-ideological, non-partisan fashion to say, man, there is just no way this guy can be president for 4 more years. Nothing like that occurred. But I do think, you said going after the moderators is not a great strategy, but I think there's going to be some soul searching in Republican circles. I don't know who prepped Trump for this debate. It was not good. And then agreeing to do this debate when we just had a debate that was excellently moderated by CNN, where they did not jump in and try to contextualize or say, well, that's not true, or here's why that's not true. Again, the fact-checking should be done by the other candidate. Leave it to the candidates, or else it's one-sided and unfair. If they're going to do it this way, then they should have a moderator who is conservative-leaning or more friendly to Trump to do that for the Kamala statements, and then they can have those people do it for the Trump statements. So it came across to me as, and I'm not at all in the tank for or supporting Donald Trump, but it seemed pathologically that they were out to get him and did so. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion about the unfairness of that. But at the end of the day, it was on Trump to win the debate, to stay focused on the issues. He did not do that. He talked about the pet eating thing, which has been there's not reporting. And he said dogs. The meme online was A, that it was cats, and B, it's not true. There's no allegation of pets being eaten. The allegations being made in the town of Springfield, Ohio, was that wild ducks, geese, were being hunted. That's what some citizens have reported to local media and at local city council meetings, which is a very different matter, and I think is not the issue Trump wanted to or should have wanted to focus on this debate. It's how to deliver on the American dream for all Americans, how to make the economic situation better, and he got bogged down.
Right. Kamala Harris actually does have plans for precisely that. She spoke to the American dream and growing up in a middle-class family a lot tonight. She spoke specifically about her plan for startups and a part of the opportunity economy plan to have $50,000 in tax deductions. She spoke about the $6,000 that would go to young families as a tax credit in the first year of their child's life. She said this can go to, if you want to spend it on rent, if you want to spend it on a stroller, whatever the additional expenses you have. She wants to make starting a family more affordable. She also talked about allowing people to pursue homeownership, which is a big part of the American dream, with down payment assistance. Donald Trump, when asked about his health care plan that he has been promising for 9 years, gave the response, "I have concepts of a plan." To the millions of Americans that are denied necessary coverage and prolong going to the doctor because they don't have health insurance, that is not a sufficient answer. And even when he was pressed on his record, Kamala won on that. So even if you might think, inflation's been something Americans have struggled with, these past 4 years haven't been easy, in large part because of the pandemic we experienced. He even lost out when he brought up Afghanistan, because Kamala Harris brought up the actual record on Afghanistan, saying 4 presidents have said we are going to get out of Afghanistan, and Joe Biden's the only one who actually did.
But
Donald Trump's negotiated plan was to pull out sooner. She pointed out it was an extremely weak deal. And then actually Trump's own national security advisor said it was weak. And he bypassed the government of Afghanistan, and negotiated directly with the Taliban and invited them to Camp David. She really had a moment with that. I still think.
Do you think she had a moment with that? I thought that was a very confusing. I don't know how we can organize a withdrawal from Afghanistan without having some conversations with the Taliban. I mean, maybe if you're the most hawkish of the hawks, most interventionist, pro-regime change, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. Maybe this is the Cheney in the Democratic Party now or something, saying it was like shameful to talk to the Taliban. I think that was like totally incoherent, and she was articulating a foreign policy vision there that was, while saying that Joe Biden was right to get out of Afghanistan, it was wrong to negotiate with the Taliban. Well, that was a part of the drawdown. So that, to me, that made absolutely no sense. And in fact, on foreign policy, there wasn't that much difference between them. They talked about Israel only very briefly. If you're someone who's a critic or skeptic of the bipartisan foreign policy consensus, I don't think you were getting significant policy differences between these candidates. 2 other quick things wanted to mention. It came up, Kamala Harris said that she is a gun owner. Did you catch that? That's news to me. I wonder where she is registered to have a gun in D.C., in California. I wondered, just asking, I have no idea what that, if that was a throwaway line or if she meant it. Of course, she should be able to own a gun like anyone else, but that was news to me, so I found that interesting. The other thing I wanted to mention is, of course, Taylor Swift has just put out her endorsement of Kamala Harris as expected. That came out now. Your thoughts, Jessica?
Yeah, I think that's huge. Absolutely huge to have Taylor Swift's endorsement. This comes as she swirled in controversy, hanging out with Brittany Mahomes, who was seen liking posts from Donald Trump on social media. How could they be at the U.S. Open together? So her fans really wanted her to say something. They were calling on her documentary, Miss Americana, where she was extremely critical of Marsha Blackburn. And she spoke about standing up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient for you. So they really see her as someone who needs to speak about politics because she's essentially promised that to her fan base. And so that's going to bring in a lot of young voters, a lot of women voters. A campaign official from the Harris campaign said in the 9 p.m. hour, when they were speaking on women's issues, specifically reproductive rights, 71% of grassroots donors were women. So this is a big moment for women, a big moment for the Swifties and the Gaylors. I think that, it does matter. I did hear some criticism that Taylor Swift is a bandwagoner endorsing Kamala Harris when she's winning, dating Travis as he's winning the Super Bowl. I think, correlation is not causation. It just all happened that way. I don't think she's a bandwagoner, Robbie.
That does it for The Hill's special coverage of the Trump-Harris debate. Make sure to tune into Rising tomorrow morning, where we'll have more analysis of the winners and losers of the night. Thanks for watching. Hello, welcome to Rising. I'm Robby Soave, joined by Jessica Burbank to react to the first half of the Trump-Harris debate, which is taking place. There's already plenty of stuff to get into. And Jessica, I don't know about you. For me, the headline so far has been the moderators, which I'm going to have a lot of critical things to say about this time around. They've been very active fact-checking or attempting to fact-check Donald Trump, which I can see on social media is irritating a whole lot of people on the right, feeling that it is not equal whatsoever, that it's just focused on Donald Trump. In fact, there's been times where Kamala Harris has almost disappeared from the debate because it's just Trump being combative with the moderators. That's not what happened in the CNN debate with Joe Biden, where they basically just asked them both questions and you didn't have that kind of thing. Here it's aggressive. That's what's going to be talked about on the right tomorrow. What's your reaction so far?
Yeah, I think if they want moderators that are not going to have to interject and correct the record on what's true, they should just find a candidate who doesn't lie constantly. He said he actually won the election in 2020 and the evidence is there. He said Walz is for the post-birth execution of babies. He talked about post-term abortions after 9 months and after birth happening. That doesn't happen in the United States. They had to correct the record on that. He's saying people don't go to Kamala Harris's rallies and she's bussing them in from other states because no one would want to go otherwise. He talked about dogs being eaten in Springfield. That's a story we debunked earlier on the show today.
Well, and he got that wrong, actually, because the allegation was not that they were eating dogs, but that they were eating cats, which prompted all of the cat memes on social media. Of course, the actual truth is that there is not an allegation of a cat being eaten by a Haitian immigrant. What the residents of the town were complaining about is wildlife, ducks being killed by the immigrants, and there are reports of people saying that, not eating people's pets. So he didn't pay attention to the meme enough.
Yeah, I guess not. He talked about the FBI reporting that crime is down, that's actually wrong and not factual. He talked about the fact that he believes the president and vice president can sign bills into law without Congress. So he said a lot of things that are just plainly not true. He's defected to answering with the same old playbook on tariffs. He says China will pay for them rather than the American people. Same playbook saying Mexico is going to pay for the wall. And so we're seeing him running 2016 over again when it didn't work when he ran it over again in 2020.
Yeah, but what I want to know is why, and that's all fine, and that's Kamala's job to call that out and to correct him if he's exaggerating or saying things wrong. The moderators are helping her tremendously. She was not really pushed on. I mean, I am very against tariffs. I think Trump's tariffs are a bad policy. I think Biden's continuation of the tariffs was a bad policy. And she kind of got asked about that, and she didn't answer that at all. Well, you're criticizing his economic plan, but isn't there tremendous amounts of continuity on that? I did want to bring up something she alluded to very early on that a lot of people described as acknowledgement of the lab leak theory. So here's the exact quote of what she said. She said, talking about COVID and China, that what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet, "Thank you, President Xi," exclamation point. When we know that Xi was responsible for not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID. Now, that could, I guess, just be transparency about wet market or that kind of thing. But I saw RFK Jr., for instance, on Twitter interpreting that as a an ode to the lab leak, which showing, if that's what she meant, we've come a long way in this discourse that now the Democratic presidential candidate is also talking about it.
Right. I will say the moderators are journalists. They have a duty to their viewers to ensure that the truth is said on the channel. What stood out to me the most is the conversation around abortion. You had Kamala Harris talking about in detail what women are going through thanks to the abortion bans that went into effect after Roe v. Wade was overturned, thanks to the Trump-appointed Supreme Court justices. She did a very good job detailing that there are women who are struggling with miscarriages, who have to bleed out in waiting rooms because doctors are afraid to operate because they don't know if the procedure that's required will be considered an unlawful abortion. When asked if he would be someone who wouldn't sign a federal ban, he was actually asked about J.D. Vance, who said he would sign it, even though Trump is saying, he wouldn't sign something like that. Nothing like that would ever come before his desk. He says he never talked to his own vice presidential pick about that. So if Donald Trump, for whatever reason, isn't able to serve in office, we will have someone in office who will sign a ban. He had no answer for Kamala Harris talking about people leaving his rallies early, and him having no vision for America spoken to at these rallies, that is just all about himself and fictional characters. That, I think, really got under his skin. She said they leave early from exhaustion and boredom, and he didn't like that. He also wasn't able to answer on how he killed the bipartisan border bill. He was directly asked about why he decided to torpedo that piece of legislation when Kamala Harris accurately pointed out that he chose to run on the issue of immigration instead of do something about it.
Yeah, he didn't address that at all. She didn't address what she was asked about it, her flip-flopping on a variety of issues. She said she was going to, but then she didn't really. And look, I don't agree that it's the moderator's job I don't think they should be engaged in nearly as much fact-checking as they're doing, because it's coming out totally biased that Donald Trump has to debate 3 people at once, and the moderators have tremendous power to, as soon as he stops speaking, they go, we just have to correct because that wasn't true, and they say that. They're not doing that to Kamala Harris. I think the hands-off approach that, for instance, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash took during the first debate was far superior to what we're witnessing here, and there's going to be but it's having an effect. I agree that it's working to hurt Trump. He has been somewhat rattled so far. Kamala has lured him into a couple areas of discussion that are not particularly productive for Trump, talking about, yes, for instance, the rallies and that kind of thing, having him talk about his business record and that kind of stuff. We're way past that. He needs to be hitting how the policies of the Biden administration have failed the country on the economy, on immigration, how Harris is a part of those policies. Turn it back on that at every time. And he's allowed her to draw him into some less favorable territory. They spent a whole lot of time on abortion. Again, the moderators are really doing Kamala a lot of favors, I have to say, and it's showing. And the betting markets right now are not too high on Trump's chances to win this debate.
Yeah, I think a big reason for that is we really haven't heard a solid answer on what his vision is policy-wise for the country. He's busy lying about things that have happened in the past instead of speaking about what his policy plan is, what he will do to address the issues he's asked about. And so what we have is, yes, he's lying a lot. Kamala Harris isn't getting fact-checked by the moderators because she doesn't have a loose interpretation of the truth. She's not up there lying like he is. But he definitely, I would agree, is taking the bait. It's like when you're fishing, there's sunnies, which are something that will just bite at anything that flashes. That is Donald Trump tonight, absolutely. Yeah. Do you think, Robby, Kamala Harris got under his skin a little bit with some of these questions?
What's that? I do think she's gotten under her skin, yes. Yeah, I think
that but part of that is he's willing to take the bait. For whatever she throws out, he's responding to absolutely everything that she says, every little comment, instead of, talking about his policies. And I think that makes this debate so far, at least for me, definitely a loss for Donald Trump.
I mean, she's absolutely repeated, she accused him of calling the neo-Nazis very fine people, something that Snopes has debunked, for instance, that's not what he said. Moderators didn't jump on her to correct her there. They haven't jumped on her about anything. In fact, they didn't, when she said she was going to explain why she changed her mind about fracking and then didn't, they didn't care. So it's got to either be, in fact, I don't really want them to do that. I think it's the candidate's job to cross-examine each other in the way that Trump did so skillfully of Biden in the first debate, and Biden was incapable of doing because he's no longer cognitively fit to be in this kind of
what was the lie in the answer about
contest.
fracking? What did she lie about in that response?
She did not. She said she would explain all of these alleged flip-flops, and then she said she's not for banning fracking, but she was for it in the past. So she didn't. She was asked to explain whether she counts this as a flip-flop or change of her opinion, and she said she would do all of that, and then she didn't. She just said she doesn't have that opinion anymore.
Yeah, she said she believes in a transition to renewable energy, and her values on that haven't changed. That was her approach to get to a place of renewable energy when she ran the first time around and was on her website in 2019. And she said now, she's in Pennsylvania, she's vice president, she hasn't banned fracking, but she still believes in a transition. So her values are the same, that we need to get to a more sustainable place when it comes to where we're getting our energy from. Her values are the same, but her policy approach has changed. So I think she sufficiently answered that. It is true that she hasn't banned fracking as president. In fact, she explained this under the Inflation Reduction Act and a lot of the post-COVID policy and economic stimulus bills. They actually approved new permits for fracking under the Kamala Harris administration. She was the tie-breaking vote for that piece of legislation. So it is true that it was on her policy plan, but I think she sufficiently answered that question and definitely did so without lying. What I'm looking for from Trump is just, I'm keeping a tally of how many things he lies about because it's getting a little bit entertaining. I would like some description of what his policy plan is. This is leaving a void for Project 2025 to, I think, fill the blank because he's not painting a vision or even talking about Agenda 47 tonight.
Well, we will be back with more analysis of the rest of the debate coming up soon. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo was grilled by lawmakers over his nursing home COVID policies during a 2-hour hearing before the GOP-led House Select Subcommittee on the pandemic. Cuomo vehemently defended his record on COVID, which includes the controversial directive during March of 2020 to readmit COVID patients back into nursing homes. He also apologized to families impacted by COVID while blaming Donald Trump. Let's watch.
Thank you. First, to the families of the victims here today and across the country, I am sorry for your loss, and I believe you are owed an apology because this country should have done better. There is no reason why we lost 1.2 million people, more than any country on the globe, when we have the most sophisticated medical system. This committee must deliver real answers so it never happens again, and I am here today to help in that mission. As you know, New York was hit first and worst by COVID through no fault of its own. I did daily briefings, and millions listened in because they because they needed information and guidance. And yes, I often vehemently disagreed with President Trump because from day one, he willfully deceived the American people, denying COVID's very real threat, telling us that it was like the flu, it would go away by Easter, it was a Democratic hoax, use Clorox. And his lies and denials delayed our response, let the virus spread, and this country never caught up.
In a fiery exchange, Republican Representative Elise Stefanik questioned Cuomo about his $5 million book deal. Let's watch.
My question to you is, when were you negotiating for your multi-million-dollar advance deal for your book as seniors were dying in nursing homes? That is the question in front of you.
You can't make up facts, Congresswoman.
You're the one making up facts. You're the one who undercounted nursing home deaths. You're the one who I want to ask right now. You apologize today, but there are families sitting here. I want you to turn around, look them in the eye, and apologize, which you have failed to do. Will you do it?
This is not about political theater. It's
no, this is about accountability.
Why did 1.2 million Americans die? Why did more Americans die than any country on the globe?
You're the former governor who's disgraced under oath.
Why did you let the president lie to the people of the United States?
This executive order was under your name.
Marjorie Taylor Greene also took shots at Cuomo and his former aide in his administration who was recently charged for actions that benefited the Chinese government.
Are you either the dumbest tool of the Chinese government, or did you know for a fact that you were being used by the Chinese spy that was working for you?
I've read a lot about you too, Congresswoman. I think this is a very serious matter. It
is serious, that's right.
The She was a junior member in my team. I wouldn't recognize her if she was in this room today. But I think it is a serious matter. I don't think this was just in New York. I think there is an infiltration of Chinese, maybe Russian operatives.
The Democrat Party's definitely had a problem with Chinese spies. Yes, you're right.
Fiery indeed. So it looks like Andrew Cuomo was not having an enjoyable time there. Deservedly so, answering questions about his COVID policies, which we've criticized numerous times on this show. You know, not just readmitting people who had COVID who were stable but positive for COVID back into nursing homes where they could infect the most vulnerable Americans of all. That's a policy that, of course, was at the federal level and that many states followed through on that as well. But what distinguishes Cuomo's behavior is that he wrote a book bragging about how he handled the pandemic, and he minimized the death toll in nursing homes in order to tell a more flattering story about how he handled everything, which ultimately led to was part of the reason he had to step down as governor, although there was also multiple sexual harassment type accusations against him.
Right. I wonder if Cuomo's book has an accurate telling of events, or if it's a little bit more embellished, a little bit more of a personal narrative. I could see it if it includes data of what the impact of his policies were in the state and what went into the decisions being read by other heads of state to do a better job making policies in times of pandemics or epidemics. Maybe to learn from the mistakes that are there, but to take a $5 million book deal after leaving office disgraced because of how you lied about COVID deaths, but also because of the sexual harassment and assault allegations against you, it's just shocking that someone in American politics can continue to have a career after this. And that exchange with Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course, was very funny. The way he said, "Yeah, I've read about you too." And then they go on to say it's a very serious matter, though. I think he handled that actually well, talking about, you know, the operatives and infiltration in the country that we have and that it's a serious issue. I don't know if that was a nod to the recent investigation of right-wing influencers like Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, and Benny Johnson around the Russia allegations. But I thought he handled that line of questioning pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, there's no getting around the fact that there was someone being paid off by China to thwart Taiwanese access to the governor, to officials. This has been more a problem under Hochul, where this person had a more senior role. We've come to understand. I suppose we can perhaps take Cuomo at his word that he didn't really know who she was and she was a lower level person. At that time, she's been a higher level person for Hochul, being paid by China to thwart Taiwan policy. There has been this infiltration. It was actually glad to hear him acknowledge it. Infiltration, certainly by China. You know, the Russia stuff, I think, has been somewhat exaggerated. Now, we did have this influence operation unmasked where they paid Russia Today was using Russian funds to secretly pay, without their knowledge, as you point out, Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, millions of dollars. Of course, they didn't know where the money was coming from, and it's not like they suddenly developed the views they had, right? They were sharing views that are being described as pro-Russian or soft on Russia or whatever it is. They had those views anyway, and those views attracted financing from the Russian government. It's not like they were, you know, rah Ukraine one day and then, oops, now we got a check from Russia. We've changed what we're saying. So it's a little bit different kind of influence campaign.
Yeah, we'll see what comes out of this investigation into Sun and her husband. I think that, you know, maybe the New York government was going to do that anyway, Robbie. They were just profiting off of decisions that would have already been made. I think it is fascinating that perhaps Tim Pool and Dave Rubin and Benny Johnson, and actually many others, some in Canada, that were involved with tenant media, that you know, it might come out that, yes, they absolutely had no idea this was a Russian-backed firm. A lot of them have already denied it. We'll see what the court documents show, what those meetings were like. $100,000 is definitely not market rate for what they were up to. But I think if we're going to be upset about this kind of foreign interference, so much so that we're having a hearing about the handling of the pandemic and Cuomo hiding the death toll of elderly people in homes in New York, that if that's a time where you're going to bring up Chinese influence and this staffer that was well established to not be high up in Cuomo's office, it's shocking that that's that important. But AIPAC's influence on our government is not. That's what's really jarring today. And a lot of people are showing their hypocrisy there by being more upset about this than they are with the blatant influence of a foreign government.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this. You could cut the tension with a knife in last night's debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Things got extra heated when reproductive rights came up. Let's take a look.
The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that.
What she says is an absolute lie. And as far as the abortion ban, no, I'm not in favor of abortion ban, but it doesn't matter because this issue has now been taken over by the states.
We learned some news about Harris as well.
I've made very clear my position on fracking. And then this business about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
Talk of pets made it to the debate stage. Trump brought up that debunked story that's gone viral online that Haitian migrants are stealing and eating ducks from parks and people's cats. Let's watch.
What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Here to give his takeaway from last night's first and maybe only debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is Republican strategist Malik Abdul. Welcome, Malik.
Thanks for having me.
So we played a few highlights there. Maybe they don't match up with what yours is, but what was your main takeaway from last night?
Well, let's just get into the raw analysis. Debates aren't about who delivers the best policy. Debates are about presentation. Debates are about the optics. And when it comes to the optics, it is pretty clear that Kamala Harris had a much better night than Donald Trump. In the similar way that Donald Trump had a much better night for Kamala Harris and then Joe Biden back in June. I think the big problem is, and I was saying this going into the debate, that Republicans run the risk of doing the same things that Democrats did in the June debate with Joe Biden. They were certain that Joe Biden would wipe the floor with Donald Trump. So they lowered expectations for Donald Trump so much that the only thing that Donald Trump had to do was at least just look presidential, seem as if he were presidential, and he ended up having a good night. In this case, Republicans had lowered the expectations for Kamala Harris. She's a horrible debater. We remember when Tulsi Gabbard went after her, Pete Buttigieg, a number of others have gone after, and she hasn't been the best in a debate, but she came locked, loaded, and ready. Probably shouldn't have used that term, but she came ready to debate Donald Trump, and she was able to deploy what are literally debate or pre-debate strategies. And I think that that worked for her in ways that it did not work for Donald Trump, because whether or not you believe she would do what she said that she was going to do, whether or not she was even being truthful in what it was she was saying, it was convincing enough in the form of a debate performance. And so that's why I think that Donald Trump had a lot of lost opportunities. He kind of touched on some things, but Donald Trump failed. You know, we just saw the Olympics, and we remember Simone Biles being able to land stick her landing. Donald Trump was not able to stick most of his landings. And that's how Kamala Harris, for me, she just hasn't the edge, and who ended up getting something out of the debate.
Well, many conservatives online are saying that's because Donald Trump wasn't just up against Kamala Harris, but he was also up against the moderators who fact-checked him a couple times to say things that he was saying were not true. They made no similar attempt to fact check Kamala Harris. What do you think of the moderation and how that played into Trump's performance?
So I actually think that the attacks on the moderators are warranted here. We didn't see a similar thing in the CNN debate with Dana Bash and Jake Tapper. And it was noted in the media today, talking about CNN, that their fact checker found that Donald Trump lied. And this is by the time he had done his analysis. Donald Trump had lied 33 times and Kamala Harris had lied 0 times. Now, how is it that Kamala Harris, the things that she said about Charlottesville and some of these other things, Trump's position on abortion, wanting to ban, it doesn't matter. But once you get to debating that the moderators, claiming that the moderators weren't fair to me, it usually means you're on the losing side. Remember back in June, Democrats were saying that the moderators failed to fact check Donald Trump. So then they were blaming that on the moderators at this point. I think that conservatives have a valid argument about how the debate was moderated because Kamala Harris, if I remember, was not challenged on any of the mistruthful or the lies that she told a number of times, while in the case of Donald Trump was even, when we're thinking about the Ukraine answer, they were essentially giving layups to Kamala Harris, asking Donald Trump instead of the question, or to Kamala Harris, how is it that we've been in this for about 2 years now, and we're sending billions of dollars over there to Ukraine. How is it that your administration hasn't moved us towards a ceasefire deal? What do you think? You guys just released this report to Congress on the next steps for Ukraine. Well, what actually does that mean? What is the strategy in Ukraine? They didn't ask her that. They asked Donald Trump, essentially, so you don't want Ukraine to win? Fine. Attack the moderators, but it does not excuse Donald Trump's own performance where he failed to connect the dots on a number of issues. And I just think ultimately, since we're talking about optics, that is a thing that just did not work well in his favor. I do not believe that this debate will hurt Donald Trump in the same way that the June debate hurt Joe Biden, but it does feed into some of the negative narratives about Donald Trump. So it didn't necessarily hurt him like Biden, but it didn't help him a whole lot. Kamala Harris, in this instance, was helped a whole lot from her debate performance because she at least looked presidential, whether you believe what she said or not.
I'm curious what you make of Donald Trump's statements on J.D. Vance. When he was asked about J.D. Vance saying he would sign a federal ban on abortions, Donald Trump said he's never talked to J.D. Vance about that. What do you make of their relationship and his recounting of J.D. Vance's policy, or rather lack thereof, on the debate stage last night?
So I was going in, I didn't think that this was a good pairing. Even though there were people who were saying that J.D. Vance has a relationship with Donald Trump, it's very hard to have a relationship with somebody that you've barely known for 2 years now. Donald Trump didn't have a relationship with J.D. Vance before J.D. Vance started running for the Senate. At least as far as I recall, there was no relationship there. And I think that relationship, it is not the type of relationship that Donald Trump has with maybe a Marco Rubio or even a Tim Scott, for that matter, because they've been able to kind of be the Donald Trump whisperer in ways that J.D. Vance, as the number 2, simply hasn't been able to do. J.D. Vance recently answered the question on what would he and Trump do around addressing the issue of affordable, like childcare costs. J.D. Vance started talking about maybe having the grandmother babysit or credentialing requirements, and really not addressing the answer. I do not believe, and I think Donald Trump saying that he hasn't had a conversation with J.D. Vance about this, it speaks to my belief that there is not a strong relationship. What I believe that there are elements around Donald Trump who thought that J.D. Vance was a good pick. I'm not even convinced that that J.D. Vance was Donald Trump's own first pick. I think that this was something that someone, maybe the last person in the room, what I've heard, that person is his son, Don Jr., convinced him that J.D. Vance was the man to carry the MAGA mantle. But I think that J.D. Vance has been a terrible pick, and his inability to move the numbers in any type of significant way, I think it speaks to that.
Malik Abdul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Pennsylvania will play a pivotal role in this presidential election, as it does in most recent election cycles. Per the latest New York Times polling, Harris and Trump virtually neck and neck in the state, with Harris at 49% and Trump at 48%. The swing state has sided with the winner in the past two elections. No surprise then that Harris and Trump have both been frequent visitors to Pennsylvania in recent weeks. And as a reminder, Biden flipped Pennsylvania in 2020 by winning big in Philadelphia and scoring bigger margins in the suburbs around Pittsburgh. In Philadelphia back in 2016, Trump narrowly won Pennsylvania, carrying predominantly rural or suburban counties.
Listen to Trump recently appealing to Pennsylvanians in the Wilkes-Barre Township.
This is a very consequential vote in Pennsylvania because they say that if you win Pennsylvania, you're going to win the whole thing. We cannot let these people win Pennsylvania.
Meanwhile, Harris spent part of her Labor Day in Pittsburgh speaking to a crowd of labor union workers with President Biden. Let's watch.
Ballots in Pennsylvania will start dropping in 14 days. 14 days. And this election is, as much as anything else, a fight for the promise of America. For the promise of America. We love our country. We love our country. And we know it is one of the highest forms of patriotism to fight for the ideals of our country. And that's what this election is about. And about the promise of America. And I don't need to tell unions what the promise looks like. It's what you do every day.
She wasted no time right afterwards hosting a rally in Philly. We were curious to hear how the debate played in the pivotal state. And for that, we turned to Julia Terruso of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thanks for coming on, Julia.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get into this. How do you think this debate will specifically impact the voters in Pennsylvania that Harris needs to carry the state?
Yeah, well, I think the target audience for both campaigns are those undecided voters in states like Pennsylvania. And what we know about that group is that it's a small group. It's about 3% of the electorate, although there's a larger number, about 10%, who say in polls they could still change their mind. So I think that overall, Vice President Harris did a slightly better job of directing her message at the center, goading the former president into some of the behaviors and Trumpisms that we know some moderate voters, some undecided voters feel can be alienating. And I've talked to some Republicans here in the state today who, echoed just that they might have had some frustrations with the moderators, but that they also think it was a bit of a missed opportunity for the former president to speak to those voters in the center who are really looking for, any excuse to kind of go in either direction.
I think it was very much, yes, the verdict by pundits, media professionals, that Kamala Harris did a somewhat better job, in part because of the reasons you mentioned, Donald Trump having to fight a couple times with the moderators themselves. But I have heard a more mixed review from swing voters, particularly on the economic plans presented. And that's really going to make a difference, I suspect, in Pennsylvania. Kamala Harris's record on energy, green issues. She got asked about renouncing her previous stance on fracking and all of that. Do you think this tiny sliver of voters overall in the electorate and in Pennsylvania who will make the difference in this election, they were paying attention, I understand, to those messages in particular that started out being talked about in the debate, but I don't know that either candidate really offered a plan that spoke to them.
Yeah, there's style and there's substance, right? And I think that for a lot of voters, the most important question was that first question about inflation at the top of the debate. And in Pennsylvania, the top issue is the economy. And a lot of, voters I talk to here are frustrated. They're not sure if either candidate has a plan for them. And I think, you're absolutely right that they're there wasn't a ton of substance from either candidate on how to address the economic concerns that the Pennsylvanians have. And for the big attack coming into this debate was from former President Trump, with some of these issues that the vice president has flip-flopped on, including fracking, which is an issue in Pennsylvania. She addressed fracking. She didn't address as many of those other issues head on. It didn't really become a focus of the debate, though. So whether that remains a question for voters, I think it might, but it also wasn't something that he really capitalized on pointing out in the debate either.
Kamala Harris at one point specifically talked about voters in Pennsylvania, pointing to the record of approving additional fracking permits being the deal-breaking vote in the key piece of legislation following COVID in the Inflation Reduction Act. She talked a lot about bringing manufacturing jobs back and having the endorsement of the UAW's president, Shawn Fain. She spoke about the $50,000 in a tax deduction for startups, $6,000 for young families in the first year of their child's life, and allowing people to pursue home ownership through providing down payment assistance. Are any of these issues you think could win over some of the working class Pennsylvanians that feel like, maybe the Democratic Party had left them behind in the past?
Yeah, I think Pennsylvania is a state that, especially in its big cities and some of its small towns, a lot of people are living below the poverty line. The child tax credit was a big game changer for a lot of families in Pennsylvania, and it's a policy that is very popular, and I think that's why we continue to hear the vice president talking about it. I think the question is how some of those more specific plans help convince voters who are really focused on the price of their groceries and their rent going up, and making that connection to kind of the longer term plan to drive down some of these economic concerns.
So can we ask you for predictions? The state is so close right now. Pennsylvania is the must-win state for both candidates. I was a little thrown by Kamala Harris's decision not to choose the sitting governor, Josh Shapiro, who is very popular and has a proven winning record. Not even talking about the issues or policies, but just someone who has a track record of winning in this very closely divided must-win state. Even if that was worth a small increase in the votes she might get in Pennsylvania, that would seem to me like it would be worth it. So where do we stand right now with the election, 60 days away?
Yeah, I think we stand in a dead heat, and it's looking very neck and neck in Pennsylvania. In the polls that we've seen, the state is just one that, because of its geography, its demographics, it tends to be a close state, and I think we're going to continue to see that. We'll see if this debate moves the needle at all. Most people I'm talking to, even if they have a clear perspective on who did better, they're not sure that it's really gonna change too much in the polls. We'll see. So bearing any sort of surprises in the next 2 months, I think it'll remain close, and it really could come down to, can Harris define herself for these voters who are flirting with, voting for her? Can she turn out her base? And for Trump, can he hold on to the numbers he's grown in different parts of Pennsylvania and maybe win back some of the voters who flipped from him to Biden last year?
Julie, I'm curious how Pennsylvanians have been receiving J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, the VP picks of either presidential candidate. Of course, Josh Shapiro was in the running. What do you make of their reception in the state?
I think the Veep stakes were big for us in Pennsylvania because the governor was on that short list. But what I've learned in the week since is that I really do think voters are focused on the top of the ticket. Vance and Walz have made several visits to the state, and I think they will continue to. And I think both campaigns are actually looking for a similar thing from both of the governor and the senator. Appealing in these more Rust Belt or even rural parts of Pennsylvania where President Biden did better than Hillary Clinton had done in 2016, and where Democrats are hoping to pull more votes out. But at the same time, those are a lot of places where former President Trump also pulled more votes out than he had in his first presidential run. So I think they're looking for and getting similar things from both candidates. Governor Walz was, I think, nursing a young cow in Lancaster, and J.D. Vance has been talking about his upbringing. So they're hoping that'll boost some appeal in these areas that aren't traditionally, for Democrats, aren't traditionally Democratic strongholds, and that for Republicans, they're hoping will continue to pull out more Republican votes.
Julia, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris received a major celebrity endorsement last night. Just moments after the debate, pop star Taylor Swift publicly shared her support for Harris and her running mate Tim Walz. She posted, "I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris because she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them." She signed the post "Childless Cat Lady," a direct reference to Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance's recent remarks on America being run by childless cat ladies.
As I'm sure you all have seen, last night's debate got testy, to say the least. The former president called Harris the border czar. Let's watch.
What about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people that she allowed to pour in? She was the border czar. Remember that. She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said at the beginning, "Oh, I'm surprised you're not talking about the border yet." That's because she knows what a bad job they've done.
Joining us now to discuss is former Wisconsin Democratic Senate candidate Stephen Olaquera. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So what was your take on the debate? I think most people are saying this was a win for Kamala Harris. But what did you think were the highlights?
Well, Kamala came in with a strategy to, one, introduce herself, two, cast herself as the candidate of the future, and three, to push some of Trump's buttons. And I think Trump's strategy, I guess, was to be himself and react to those buttons being pushed. I mean, when you have Trump talking about migrants eating pets, I don't think you're on the winning side of a debate. So I think Kamala executed that strategy extremely well. I don't think she had a perfect debate. I think that some swing voters might have been looking for more substance from her on issues like, in the first question, the economy, are we better off 4 years ago today as we were 4 years ago? I think the answer is an easy yes, although we're still facing some challenges around costs and inflation. So she didn't answer that directly, but the bottom line is I think she comes away with an edge from this debate. She clearly won, and I think Trump was fumbling around and clearly didn't have a strategy.
Yeah, there was a lot of non-answering. It makes me wonder what the debate prep even looks like. It seems like Donald Trump is just surrounded by yes men. He probably went back in the room and talked to his team and was like, "But you said bring up how student loan forgiveness was struck down in the courts." And they were like, "Yeah, but not when you're being asked about blocking the border bill." Every answer was seemingly an evasion. And I think that played to Kamala Harris's hand in this debate room. She talked about, economic policy plans. Trump said he has concepts of a plan. There were a lot of key moments that drew attention. I don't want the Taylor Swift endorsement to take away from that. So let's talk about that first. What were the standout moments for you?
Yeah, well, I think first, when you talk about, for example, climate change or Roe v. Wade, those are all issues that Kamala is going to be the winner on. She represents a view that the majority of people have. I think she did pretty well on foreign policy, but I do think that, again, I think about who's actually doing work here to not just fire up their base, but also attract swing voters. And I don't think that we got enough from either candidate. I think that Kamala, she presented herself as presidential. She's clearly competent and can do the job. So I think that was a key test, a key threshold for a lot of people that people want to see passed. And I think Trump was sort of the same old Trump. And so I think that Trump could have done a lot better on inflation, talking about the economy, which generally been issues that he's done better on. But again, he just didn't have that strategy. And when Kamala came in talking about you've been fired by X millions of voters, I encourage voters to go to your rallies because they're boring. She's asking for Trump to take that bait, and he absolutely took it hook, line, and sinker. And so I think people come away from this feeling like, all right, Kamala is a competent one. Trump is sort of spinning his wheels in a right-wing echo chamber.
Of course, conservatives were very unhappy with the moderation in this debate. It seemed like Donald Trump had to go up against not just Kamala Harris, but 3 people at various points. He was fact-checked in real time. She was never fact-checked in real time. I think the way CNN handled the last debate was great. Jake Tapper, Dana Bash, leave it to the candidates to do the fact-checking, because if you're going to intervene and just have it be entirely one-sided, then you're going to open yourself up to the very criticism that ABC courted last night.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Robbie, because you're right. The candidates have the responsibility to be fact-checking the other candidates. And I think when debate moderators get into that, although I do think they were factual in their fact checks, you play a game that you kind of can't win, which is you have to think about how you can be balanced. And it wasn't like both candidates were flawless from a factual perspective. And so I think it has the effect of a lot of people on the political right feeling like the debate was unfair to them. The debate moderators were out to get them. And I think that's damaging and it's not helpful. So I agree with you that the candidates have the responsibility to do the fact checking.
We should talk about Israel. How do you think she handled that question? Donald Trump said Israel won't exist if Kamala Harris is elected. She spoke a little bit about a path forward, not just saying we need a 2-state solution. She did say she believes Palestinians have a right to self-determination and freedom. There was only one question on the subject. It really is a vulnerability for her. Why do you think there was only one question, and how do you think she handled it?
Well, I think one reason why I think there's only one question, even though it probably deserves more attention, is that this might be the only debate of the cycle. So I think the moderators were trying to get to a lot of different questions. I think that Kamala clearly is trying to strike a balance where she wants to say that Israel has a right to defend itself, and at the same time, she's saying it matters how, and that too many people have died on the Palestinian side. I think that she stated her positions, but I don't think that she laid out a strategy of how she's going to do them. And I don't know if she said how she's going to do things differently than President Biden. I do think that she certainly had a more nuanced perspective and a more thoughtful perspective than President Trump, who's just a blunder and didn't really have too much to say about the topic other than Israel is over under a Kamala Harris presidency. So I think that Kamala is trying to do some work on the progressive base in her party, as well as the moderate base in her party. And I think she tried to strike the balance. I don't know if she did anything further than what President Biden is suggesting right now. And I think there's some foreign policy voters, people who really pay attention to this issue, who probably didn't get as much as what they're looking for. But I think she came into this with the do no harm principle, and she definitely accomplished that.
She is the sitting vice president. She's been a part of the administration, and there's widespread dissatisfaction among the American people on the economy and on immigration in particular. She's laid out some economic plans that have not received the best reviews from economists. And many people say that many experts say that just giving more money to people in order to help them buy houses, for instance, that's gonna immediately raise the price of housing. It's a supply problem, not a unwillingness of people to go out and seek for homes to buy. The tariffs are something that Biden actually continued from Trump that many economists say are not a good idea. Were we hearing a lot of answers last night from either party on how these fundamental economic issues in America are going to get addressed?
No, I don't think we did. I think that at the convention as well as in the debate, we didn't really hear much really from either candidate on their domestic economic plans, even though that clearly is the number one issue for voters. I think that Kamala came in with this idea that people need to know who she is, where she comes from, middle-class background, and that her judgment and her values are on their side. And I do think she did a decent to good job of that. I do think that she really indexed highly on her, her family background and that she knows what it's like to be part of the middle class. She did talk about the housing proposal, but she didn't really go much further on that. And again, look, which voters are you trying to appeal to? I do think that Democratic voters were fired up and elated by this debate performance and probably don't see an issue here. Again, I'm trying to think about the voters who I worked with and have spoken with in Wisconsin, who are those swing independent and sometimes populist voters who are looking for a little something, who might have been looking at RFK Jr., might have even been looking at Donald Trump, but are open to being persuaded by Kamala Harris. And I think they're looking for more on the domestic economic front.
So, Michael, let's get into this Taylor Swift thing. Elon Musk has now weighed in. He tweeted, "Fine, Taylor, you win. I will give you a child and guard your cats with my life." So it's safe to say there's a bit of a meltdown happening in response on the right. But what do you make of this Taylor Swift endorsement immediately after the debate?
I think it was telling that Republicans were already forecasting their fears about a Taylor Swift endorsement 4, 5, 6 months ago. So I think they had assumed this was coming and they knew it would be bad for their side. And this is the number one endorsement, culturally speaking, that I think a candidate can look for. I think Taylor waited for the right moment. I think she put out this post basically right as the debate ended. She obviously was pushing some buttons with the childless cat lady sign off. And with Elon Musk and others responding, clearly they're reacting to this. And so this is a great endorsement for Democrats. Clearly, I think it will energize some of the Gen Z and millennial voters that they've been trying to go after. And at the end of the day, I strongly believe that culture precedes politics. And this is the number one endorsement you can have from a cultural perspective in America.
Stephen Olacara, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It was a crisp autumn day with the bluest of skies. That date was September 11th, 2001. 8:46 a.m., a plane hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City, and at 9:03 a.m., another plane hit the South Building of the Twin Towers, and America was changed forever. Combat veteran and National Guardsman John Byrnes was sitting in a classroom when he heard about the terror attack.
His instincts kicked in, and he went to the nearest armory to await his assignment. He was sent downtown where mangled iron from the towers intertwined with human remains. He saw rescue dogs become depressed from the mission. He worked from midnight to noon for weeks at what is now known as Ground Zero. He soon deployed to fight in what was then known as the War on Terror. Today, Byrnes has a lot to say about those wars. He thought it was worth taking a minute to hear him remember and also look forward. He's with us now to reflect. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, happy to be on, Jessica. Thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell us what you think of that day, 9/11, and its aftermath, now looking back?
Well, every year this day, it's just very sad. I just get that little bit of grief. Hearing you describe my experiences was almost otherworldly. Usually I'm the one telling all of that. But it's a sad day. I lost friends that day at Ground Zero, right? I had 5 friends who were in the tower that morning. I had other friends who lost family members that day. It was horrific. It was a war zone in my hometown, a big city, but my hometown to me. And it was a trying 2 weeks then. We lost 2,977 people that morning. And if you add everything up since then, we've lost over 40,000 people since then around the events that happened that day. So it's a big day that really has affected America terribly.
It affected us all so much. I remember everyone who was alive at the time, remembers right where they were when they heard the news. I was in the 8th grade. They wheeled in at the time, they put in the TV so we could watch the news. Everybody at school watched the news. My parents, who didn't usually watch the news regularly, they had it on all day and all night. I remember talking to my friends about it on what was AOL Instant Messenger at the time. It was something that the country went through together. Honestly, which is almost weird to think of now in our era of just intense polarizations around news subjects and policy subjects. That was a moment of national grief and national unity. What do you think has changed since then?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. That day and the days thereafter, we came together as a country. We were united in our grief, in our anger, and in our resolve to do something about it. And we have become so divided as a nation. And I was thinking about this. I wrote a little blurb about it to email out to some of the Concerned Veterans for America followers. And we were so united then. We're so divided now. And the thing is that you look at the political debates, you look at the policy arguments. It's clear that most people in those debates want what's best for their families, want what's best for their friends and neighbors, wants what's best for the people they care about. We just disagree about how to get that done in a lot of cases. But that disagreement, if we remember how united we were on September 12th, 2001 and September 13th, 2001, it might help us get past some of these divides a little bit and at least be more civil about how we talk to each other about them. And I think that's really important. The only way we're going to solve big problems is by having discussions that respect both sides of the dialogue.
What do you make of some of the decisions made by, George W. Bush and others afterwards to send service members off to war, people who are feeling extremely patriotic, wanting to defend their families, their country, and their communities? What do you make of some of those decisions and how that might impact future generations from wanting to serve?
Well, I do my best not to politicize September 11th. I will say that as a younger, because I wasn't that young, a younger soldier, I was a student of international relations on that day. I was studying essentially international relations through a realism perspective. But I thought that the war in Afghanistan certainly was warranted. I ended up believing that the war in Iraq was warranted. And personally, I've come to change my mind about the war in Iraq and to change my mind about how long the war in Afghanistan went on. And again, not only did I lose 5 friends on September 11th, but I've lost dozens to combat and to suicide since then. So again, we were united that day. I hope united we can take a retrospective and see that, maybe we do more to prevent terrorism in the future. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that in the last 23 years. But when it comes to sending young men and women from America overseas, it takes a little perspective. It takes a little bit of wisdom to make sure that we're not doing it in the wrong way. We're not doing it for the wrong reason.
I don't think veterans issues came up once at the debate last night. I can't recall. I guess if it came up in June, it certainly wasn't a significant enough part of the conversation between Biden and Trump for me to recall that it took place. What is the state of the kind of care our veterans get? You talk about losing friends, not just overseas, but actually to suicide when they return here, when they try to deal with what they dealt with over there. How is our country failing to take care of our veterans?
Well, hours before the debate, there was a hearing in the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Chairman Bost and some of the other members held senior VA officials to account, at least did their best to. There's obviously some, endemic failure in the bureaucracy that is the VA. We saw that with the bonus scandals. Again, 10 years later with bonus scandals in the past year. Where money that was meant to treat veterans was going to give senior officials bonuses, significant 6-figure bonuses, in fact. And at the same time, there's a demand for mental health care at the VA that's not being met. And the VA is in many of those cases refusing to refer those veterans in need of mental health care out to the community care. And this is creating exacerbating the suicide and mental health crisis that veterans have. And it's a crisis across America. And you touched on it a little earlier with the question about, how the military is doing and how this is affecting the military. Recruiting is down. And, the military has been a family business since the end of the Vietnam War. Fathers and uncles encouraging sons and daughters to go into the military because some of the opportunity it offers, especially those who aren't college bound. But this recruiting crisis that the military is feeling right now has got to be in some way related to the wasteful lives that we've seen over the last 20 plus years and to the fact that it doesn't look to young men and women like the VA is going to take care of them if they do go overseas.
John, I'm curious, as someone who was, I believe, in first grade when this all happened, I probably wouldn't remember it if it weren't for my father getting on a plane that day and JFK being our closest airport. But there's a lot of younger people that don't remember 9/11 or weren't around for it that are now paying attention to politics, getting a sense of the world. What would you say to those young people about this day?
Well, I remember being a little older than you guys. I remember being in first grade in the 70s and hearing about Pearl Harbor and how much that affected us. And, in 1970, 71, 72, World War II still loomed over the country. Vietnam was still going on at that point, but World War II was a pivotal moment. Pearl Harbor was a pivotal moment. So I would say to young people that, the things that have happened from the wars that we fought in, the campaigns that we fought in since 2001, the politicians that we picked to lead us at almost every level, the way the police and, the FBI and other bureaucracies in the government, the VA do business was all affected by that day. That day really changed the way Americans feel about a lot of things, and it changed the way many, many levels of our government and many, many, many parts of that system do business today. So it had a huge impact on the country.
John, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for your service. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. Always happy to talk about this day, even when I'm not happy about it.
Of course. Well, that does it for us on Rising for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I was losing track of what day it even is. We've gone through so much politics with the debate last night. Hope you enjoyed our commentary on that. We'll be back with another episode of the show tomorrow. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you later.